I really value the collaboration we have between these different large-scale projects. So I really appreciate that we also from Co-Create were able to join you at this exciting conference. And I think it's a very interesting title you asked me to speak about, You or Youth, a Driving Force for Change. And of course, young people are such an important part or segment of the population. They clearly deserve to be heard. And also from a public health perspective, if we are successful with prevention strategies targeting this age group, it could have lifelong impact, both on the way you or the individual make healthy choices, but also how it might be possible then to mobilize them for social or system changes that could also have a tremendous impact over time. And it is tempting and easy to say that the answer to this question is yes. And of course, we have seen some example where young people really have been mobilized and offer a fresh perspective and contribute to the public discourse. And I think the climate change, of course, is a very tempting example to pull out. And you recall that during the fall of 2019, there were school strikes across Europe inspired by Greta Thunberg. And if COVID hadn't come along, it is just to speculate how this would have evolved over time. I think still we will see that this is a movement that probably will pick up again as people can start to gather again. But an important aspect here is what is it that they mobilize around? And at the beginning of the Co-Create project, we had a big youth conference organized by our NGO youth partner, Press, which is the youth organization of Save the Children. And one aspect that was really emphasized there is that adults often ask for our opinions on things that they think are important, but seldom on topics that we are engaged in. And of course, that is a challenge when you come from a public health perspective with a set agenda and you want to mobilize people and young people to move your own agenda forward. And that's something that we had to have had to struggle or grapple with within the Co-Create project, where obesity prevention was the given topic. And that might not be the most salient topic for a lot of young people. But then again, there are very strong links to climate, which they are concerned about. So there are definitely ways where you can see that you have a joint agenda. On the right of this slide, you see what is portrayed as a ladder where you go from what is often called token involvement of young people to having real involvement. It's named after Roger Hart, the Hart ladder, and it shows that often there are different levels of involvement and engagement of young people. And having reviewed the literature and seen how is a youth typically involved in public health related research in particular, we see that it really is at the bottom steps of this ladder, where they are either used as so-called peer educators, conveying information that has already been produced, or that they only take part in implementing what has been decided by adults. While the ambition then is to involve young people more directly from the beginning and as equal partner. In the Co-Create project, we had laid down 5 principles that we really try to follow up on in our work with young people. And one is this issue of independence, that they should be free to choose what topics they want to get involved in. And it's their decisions. And when it comes to obesity prevention, of course, there are lots of different topics and angles you can choose. So we really could listen to their voice. And then we should see them as being competent. They have knowledge. They are experts on issues that we as adults are not experts on. So that we should really acknowledge that and not only involve them in what is typically acknowledged as youth topics. Representation is also a key issue, where young people should be able to choose those who will represent them, and also acknowledge that no young people can represent all young people, that this is a heterogeneous group, and there have to be several voices. They should have access to information that are needed, and it is important to think of this participation as a continuous process. It's not a one-time event. So within the Co-Create project, then, we try to set up a process that could really help them to design a policy agenda with the young people, and that could result into action. And on the right here, you see how we were then trying to assess what are available policies. We decided we made have some policy databases, moving and nourishing, that was briefly touched upon yesterday, and we could convey some of that information to the young people. We were also able to assess what is the state of the art in terms of research being out there. And then we worked with them on how creating system maps, how do they perceive and see the world. And then we had these alliances where young people then generated policy ideas, refined them, and where we then also are able to evaluate or model the impact that the policies would have if in fact implemented. And this looks like a very kind of straight linear process, which of course, when it comes to practice, it isn't, but it does have a beginning with the system mapping, thinking of what are the factors that are important for young people. And it ends up with some concrete policy proposals. And the group building models is a qualitative method that we use with young people across countries, where we ask them quite simple questions about what factors they think are important in order to determine eating behavior, physical activity, or directly obesity, and then how they see them having evolved or changed over time, and how they might be interlinked with other factors that are important. And based on this methodology, we're then able to create system maps, which becomes very complicated. And this is a map where we have merged results from a number of different groups of adolescents across 5 countries in Europe. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but what was really important for us to see is how the young people have a much broader perspective on what are the important factors than what is reflected in the research literature. Where do we have evidence about important factors having impact on adolescents and their weight status? So there is a discrepancy there, and we saw that there were also factors that came out strong and clearly across all the countries that are not that often discussed as much in the literature. And mental health was one such factor that really pops up in all groups, in all countries, as a really critical factor related to the young people's perception about obesity. So we used this then, and then had a lot of activities where they could gather information and do planning for what they thought would be important factors and policies. And then we designed a dialogue forum where they could test these ideas with other stakeholders. So there we brought in decision makers from different levels, different NGOs, also from private sector. And what we really tried then was to create some tools that would open up for a dialogue where young people could meet professional business people or decision makers who are much more used to this kind of fora, but where we try to equal the level and make them respect each other's input. So we, over time, developed different tools, evolved, and had good model ready for running these in-person dialogue forums when COVID-19, of course, closed down everything. And we had to look at the process from policy idea to the concrete policy on a digital format. So we were able then with partners to develop a new tool that is a digital tool for how to run these dialogues. We call it a digital dialogue forum, and it can accommodate quite a few people. It starts out by people giving themselves a name, drawing their figure, and then facilitating discussion so that they come up with the ideas and the perspectives that they want to be put forward. And then we also have discussions of what is the common vision, what is it that they all can agree upon that they want to share. Maybe they don't agree on anything, but that's important also then. But what will be the action? What will they take further from this discussion? So that means that we have two different type of outputs. We have this process map, qualitative data, where the different people have presented their ideas. And then we have the shared ideas that they want to take further. And we received a lot of feedback at them, a large number of these, and are refining the instrument and hope to go public and make it available for everyone sometime next spring. In the project so far, lots of policy ideas have been generated, and we are still in the process of running these dialogue forums and expect even more policies to be tabled. So far, there's more than 65 that has put on the table. We have a special youth declaration that has been adopted and presented. We do make implementation plans for selected policies in different settings, and also these modeling exercises that I mentioned. We are running dialogue forums also on a European level, working with the European Youth Parliament, having a session with them this coming spring, and we also have the second Co-Create Youth Conference planned for March next year. So back to the question that you asked me to address, you or youth, the driving force for change. I think it is important that we do not put too much pressure on the young people, whether they're the driving force, or at least they should be able to be a contributing force. We want to give them the room and table to be heard and involved. And there's also the perspective of the rights perspective that was discussed earlier today at the conference related to marketing. And this is also a right, that they have a right to be heard. And I think that Co-Create is providing some important contributions in that we contribute to identify a broader set of drivers of adolescents' obesity. So help identify between adolescents' perception of drivers of obesity and the current research and policies. And I think we contribute to developing appropriate methods for involving young people in creating policies that are relevant for obesity, and also tools that facilitate dialogue on more equal footing between youth from various social groups. We have had a strong emphasis on social inequality and health, and then professional adults. And we also find that these are methods and tools that can be applied also to other topics, targets group and settings. So we hope that that will be a different but valuable contribution to moving the field of prevention of obesity among children and adolescents further. Thank you.
Thank you, Knut. Inge. Very inspiring talk. I have no doubt that this will really make a big difference in the future, at least in terms of approaches to research, because this is really very innovative. I mean, we've had an opportunity to discuss many times, what the reasoning has been at the European Commission level when they've, been considering our projects and, why they've decided to fund one and the other. And you know, clearly they made some choices that were very forward-looking, I think, and particularly in this case, Karen was observing that there were you know, clear similarities between the approach that you've been describing and what Diane Finegood said yesterday. But of course, Diane is one of your advisors, so that should come with no surprise.
Right.
There have been a number of comments in the chat and questions which have crossed with the debate on food procurement, which was the subject of the previous session. So that's all very interesting, and I really encourage everyone to go and look at the exchanges that have taken place in the chat. Just a couple of questions from Hannah Sharp in particular. She's keen to hear how you involved youth in your project. I mean, my experience very recently actually with a research project that is hopefully going to be funded by a UK funding agency that is very keen actually to have public involvement, is that, you know, it is very difficult to get involvement of the public in a way that is representative of the views of the wider public, because of course every individual is different when you're talking about ordinary people, and I assume that you've encountered the same difficulty. So I think you know, it'd be interesting to hear what you have to say on Hannah's question about that.
Well, if I briefly can address it, and I can also look at the chat afterwards, but I think we used a number of different strategies, and of course COVID did make it more difficult, there's no doubt about that, but we really have tried to address and engage youth organizations. It differs a bit between one country or another, how active they are and well organized, but at least in some countries, they really do offer a good way of engaging with youth that represent a broad spectrum of the population. Then in other settings, we went to schools and picked neighborhoods to get diversity, and were able to work through schools and with teachers. In one country, we worked with the Scout movement, which was very big and important organization. So we really tried to use different type of approaches. But I think we also underestimated how complicated it is to really capture people, and particularly keep them over time. So by going digital, it was easier to do some activities, and particularly the cross-country engagement and dialogue was facilitated by the fact that we went digital, and that added a dimension to the project that a lot of young people also really valued. So we've been trying to capitalize on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, just one last comment before I hand it over to Moitza. I noticed actually that all the youth in your pictures, when they were involved in you know, various project activities, they're all very lean actually. Were there also you know, the young people with obesity involved in these activities?
Yes, there were, but we tried. We haven't really systematically assessed that. Because we tried to be blind in a way to that. The photos that I have access to probably were no representation of Norwegian children as well.
Thank you, okay. There's also another question that it will be interesting to hear your answer in the chat, maybe from Hannah, about the sustainability of your research approach, which is another important aspect. I'll hand it over to Moitza, who will tell you about the session after the coffee break.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that this topic was not by the coincidence just before the policy plenary, because we think that really the future is in the hands of the youth. And thanks, Knut, Inge, for presenting it so nicely.